All right, so let's get started. So I've got a couple goals for our session today. The first one is to just provide a general overview of the Greenbelt or Project Facilitator Workshop. So that's ultimately what we're here for. And you may hear me talk about or say Greenbelt or Project Facilitator. Know that the two are exactly the same. I'm not honestly a huge fan of the different colored belts, but just know there's different colored belts, and just like in the martial arts, the different colors represent skill levels and in Lean Six Sigma terms, training levels and expertise. Green belt being probably the most common, which is someone that's working on a project part-time and is actually doing the regular full-time work as well. And a black belt, which is the other common type of belt, is someone who is working on projects full-time, like Lean Six Sigma is their full-time job, which is something that maybe a few years down the road we'll be looking at doing that in Kern County. So if you hear me say facilitator or green belt, it's the same thing. So that's our number one goal. The second thing we're going to work on or talk about is really one of the most important starting points, which is why should you yourself go to this workshop? I think some of you that are on are actually folks that may want to attend the workshop. Or if you're, I think most people on are managers that are going to be sending potentially people to the workshop. Why would you want to do that? What are some whys? Because if the why is big enough, we're going to have more success. So what are some whys or reasons why you would want to do this? And then number three, how to prepare for the workshop. So you'll see as we get into this, these workshops or this workshop is kind of unique in that we actually do some things before the workshop. So as you come in, you can start applying the learning right away, as opposed to like most training where you go to the training, then you leave and you figure out like, how am I going to actually apply this? And then we'll have some time at the very end to answer any questions or concerns that you might have. A little bit about me. I think most of you have either been through my intro workshop. If you haven't, I've been doing intro workshops, and we've done one Greenbelt cohort already in Kern County government. And I've been working with clients for the last 10 years or so, but been doing process improvement for about 20 years now. And I think there's really three key things that I use to describe how I do this. The first one is just keep it simple. And you'll see that Lean Six Sigma can get really complicated. And so my perspective is if we can just keep it simple, less is more. That's one of my philosophies. Number two is that I like to tie this whole process improvement initiative, Launch Kern, for example, to things we're already working on. Like nobody is looking for more work to do. So how can we use process improvement, Lean Six Sigma in this case, to get the work you're already working on done with maybe a higher level of excellence, possibly with a higher degree of certainty that we can sustain it. So how do we tie what we're doing or what we're talking about here today to existing things so we're not creating more work because nobody's looking for more work? And then number three is that I tend to focus a lot more on people than a lot of the process tools, because in the case of the world that you guys work in, like most of our economy, it's transactional. It's working with people and processes, and we know that people don't always do what they're supposed to do or don't understand what they're supposed to do. So that's one of the other components to my approach, is that we don't discard people and just focus on processes, because people tend to be about 80% of our success lies in people, and the other 20% in the processes. So that's kind of my approach, is really focusing on keeping it simple, tying it to things we're already doing, and then not forgetting that people are involved here and making sure that we're doing something to deal with potential behavioral issues or challenges that could keep us from succeeding. So just a quick comparison of the workshops that really form the basis for the Launch Kern initiative, and actually all the initiatives for all my clients. It's really these two workshops: the introductory workshop, which many of you have probably already been through, or maybe will be going through if you're going to be doing the Greenbelt training, and looking at the differences between these two workshops, because this is, I would say, 90% of the educational foundation of our effort is based in these two workshops. And the real differences are in the problem types that we're going after with these two workshops. For the intro workshop, it's typically things that we have some idea what the solutions and the causes are, whereas the facilitated project, the Greenbelt project, is something that's a little tougher and more challenging, where we may have an idea of what the solutions are or the causes are, but we don't have a really good level of confidence in what we think these solutions are actually going to work. So we need to bring a team together, and that's the second thing there, where typically it's going to require more than one person to do a project. It's a cross-functional issue that we're dealing with, as opposed to a quick win is just something that one person can do by themselves or with maybe one other person. And then the audience that we're focusing on is a little different too. For the intro, anybody that's a Kern County employee that has an opportunity to do what they do faster and better is a prime candidate for the intro workshop, whereas the Greenbelt workshop is really more for the high performers, the future leaders in county government. And then the complexity of the tools or the things that we learn in these workshops is very low with the intro workshop, where it's just within a few hours they can learn some basic tools to fix simple problems. The Greenbelt workshop is a little bit more complicated, not super complicated, but there's a higher level of complexity because we're dealing with usually a more challenging problem. And then the benefits. This isn't always true. You can see this in some of our quick wins that have saved lots of money. But typically, quick wins are smaller problems that lead to smaller savings, whether it's hours or dollars saved or a combination of the two. And Greenbelt facilitated projects tend to be a little bit bigger when it comes to hours saved and dollars saved, because more people are involved. And usually when more people are involved, there's generally more savings. And then, of course, the training is different. We'll talk a little bit about what the training actually looks like for the Greenbelt. But for many of you, you've gone through the intro workshop and know it's about a 6-hour workshop, and the Greenbelt workshop is a fair bit longer. And then the last thing is the time to complete the improvement is very quick. And obviously that's why we call them quick wins from the intro workshop. And usually it takes several months for improvements to be implemented and up and running with the Greenbelt project, because more people are involved and there's greater complexity. So that's just a quick comparison of these two workshops that essentially form the basis for all the education that we're doing with people throughout Kern County to educate them as either a facilitator or just as someone to utilize some of the simple tools to make a quick win. So here's the big question: why should I send people to this workshop? And number one, I think, is just to help you accomplish your goals, because ultimately that's what we're striving to do, is to get more work done, or to get the things that we're already tasked with doing done to a higher level of excellence, to a higher level of sustainability. So that's almost always one of my number one whys. If somebody wants to come to this workshop, we don't want to create more work for them. We want them to look at what are they already working on that this may help them do more effectively. The second thing is it's an awesome way to test leaders or the potential leadership of the abilities of the folks coming to this workshop. So if you've got someone who you think is a potential future leader, and we'll talk a little bit here in a minute about who are ideal candidates, taking on a Lean Six Sigma project is an awesome way to test someone's leadership capabilities, or to actually even develop those capabilities, because this is like my all-time favorite definition of leadership that comes from Jim Collins, where he says true leadership is getting others to follow when they have a choice not to. And if you think about it, getting people to follow you when they have a choice not to is a sign of true leadership, because if somebody's going to follow you and they have a choice not to, but yet they still decide to follow you, it means that they believe in where you're going is the right way to go. And these teams, these Lean Six Sigma teams, are led by a facilitator who is not someone that the people on the team report to. And so it's a really good test of their leadership capability that later on, when they maybe become a formal leader, there's a very high probability when you're in a direct report supervisor relationship that they're going to be an effective leader. If they can get people to follow when they have a choice not to, and when they have that direct reporting relationship where the choice isn't quite as simple, they're likely to be successful in a quote unquote true leadership position. So it's a good test of their leadership capabilities. The third thing is it's an opportunity to reward what I call rock star employees, because right now, in fact, on Monday, I taught a class, an intro class, and like many of the classes I've been teaching, it seems like about every second or third class, people will complain that, hey, we haven't had a raise in county in like years, and is this Lean Six Sigma stuff going to end up giving us raises? And of course, I can't tell them, oh, sure, it's going to give you guys raises. Maybe that could lead to raises if we save money, and that could trickle down to your back pockets. And but in the meantime, what we can do is reward people that are what I call rock star employees, people that are really superstars getting things done. It's a great way to reward them, since there's not the opportunity to reward people financially at this point in time in the county. So it's a good way to reward folks. And then the last one is maybe the most important one here, which is it helps us plant improvement seeds that grow into culture change. And this is really something that I think is so key to long-term success. And Jason kind of hit on this a little bit at the beginning, which is like if I had to set goals for every client I work with, it would be this box down here at the bottom, which says when employees see their job as not just doing their job, which is the way most organizations work. People just see their job as doing their job and that's it. But instead, they see their job as doing their job and finding ways to do their job faster and better. That's when true culture change begins to take place. So ultimately, that is one of my personal goals for every client I work with, is that we start to create this culture where people just don't come to work and do their work. They actually come to work and they look for ways to improve the work that they're doing. And this actually adds to more joy and more engagement in their work, because if you're doing the same thing over and over again, like many people are in Kern County in their jobs, it gets a little dull and a little monotonous. But when you actually give employees the opportunity to be creative in how they do their job, to find ways to do it faster and better, it will help them draw more into that job and be more engaged. And real culture change really starts to take place. So what does culture change look like? Here's just kind of a typical look at what I see in many organizations I work with, where if you start with selecting folks who are going to be potential future leaders, and you start to help develop this mindset of a new day, a faster and better way, which is really what continuous improvement is all about, is always constantly thinking about how can we do this faster, how can we do this better. We start to create this culture in the organization where, as goes a leadership team, so goes an organization, which is so true with many of the companies I work with. I often start by meeting with their leaders, and I can sense the tone and the attitudes in an organization just by meeting with their leadership team, because as that leadership team goes, so goes the rest of the organization. Other people tend to look and sound and feel just like the leaders in the organization. So what we're trying to do here is, as we pick potential future leaders to go through this Greenbelt training, we start to help them develop this mindset, this philosophy that leads to culture change. And what that change looks like is you've got these folks that then become leaders. And that attitude of a new day in a faster and better way starts to trickle down to their followers. And then eventually those followers become leaders, and the cycle just keeps going round and round. And we take it a step further. Now, maybe those folks that have gone through this workshop have become senior leaders. They have got this mindset that trickles down to their leaders, middle managers, for example, and that trickles down to followers. And this cycle just continues. And it's obviously something that takes a fair amount of time to develop, but it's got to start somewhere. And this is just one component that helps develop a culture where this becomes the mindset. And if you think about this, think about like if the vast majority of employees in Kern County had the attitude of every day they came to work, or at least most days they came to work, and they were thinking about how can I do my job faster? How can I do my job better? Number one, they would benefit because they would have more joy and engagement in their work, because they've got this autonomy to tweak and modify and polish the work that they do and feel some sense of accomplishment and seeing the results of the fruit of their labor. But even more so, we would see that transfer over to the residents of Kern County, to the customers, the clients, the people that they're serving. So it's a win-win-win situation. So this is why this training plays right into developing a culture with that kind of mindset. And that kind of plays into the goals for Kern County as well, to have that excellence in government model that is part of the goals for Kern County. Now, one thing that I want to touch on in this workshop that's not directly tied to the Greenbelt workshop is that we're kind of at this crossroads. It's kind of like we've been going down this path for about the last year or so. And if you can kind of picture this road, we're coming in here from the right on this road, and we're at this fork in the road that all organizations I work with eventually come to. Usually it's within about the first year or so. And if we would actually turn around and look back down the road to the right of this picture behind us, we would see that the path to get to where we are today is fairly level ground. It's not going to require a whole lot of effort because we haven't really been going uphill or been really challenged. And typically the first year or so of a deployment is the easiest because we've got a small percentage, maybe 5 to 10% of folks who are super eager to jump on the bandwagon of whatever comes down the pike at them. They're always the early adopters, the first ones in line when new things come. And it doesn't really require much effort. We've been seeing that in the intro workshops, is getting 30 people to come to each workshop, filling the workshops up, not a problem. Now we've kind of come to this intersection where you need to decide which way do you want to go. And there's two ways to go. Many organizations are going to go to the left here because it's the easy route, and it actually goes downhill, and we end up back where we started. That's all the research says. About 70%. I haven't seen this with my clients being quite this high, but 70% on average of change initiatives like Lean Six Sigma fail, and we end up going right back down to where we started. But then the path to the right is a lot more challenging. Obviously, if you've ever ridden a bike on a path like this, or hiked on this, or walked on this, you'll know that going uphill is much harder, but then the view is a whole lot better too when we get to the top. So we're at kind of this crossroads where we've got to decide, what are we going to do? Are we going to go uphill? It's going to require a little bit more work. And I'll give you guys some ideas as leaders, like what can you do to help us start to fill up our workshops so that we can still keep this stream of quick wins coming. So average organizations produce average results. It's kind of a no-brainer that, if our goal is to be average, you don't have to work very hard to accomplish your goal. And if we were to take an organization and split people up in that organization based on their performance, most organizations look like this. You've got a handful over on the right who are the high performers, which are the folks I was talking about earlier with our intro workshops. They're the first in line. We've already kind of chewed through them. We've hit about 10% of all employees through our intro workshops. And you got the other folks on the far left, the low performers. Those are the ones that you probably wish would go away and just quit or retire, or that you could fire if you had the ability to do that. Or there's a few in that group too that may be good candidates that want to move over to the higher performing, but they need some training and education that we can maybe help them out with. But for the most part, an organization is going to be only as good as its average performer. And you can see most organizations have more people in the middle than they do on the left or the right. So the challenge becomes, how do we get to those folks in the middle? How do we get them to shift over to the right? And it's kind of, if you think about this from a political perspective, it's kind of the same way in politics, where you've got this recent political or presidential election. You've got Trump and Clinton, going after the presidency, and neither of them spent really any time focusing on states where they had a lock on the vote. It's all about the middle voter, the independent voters, and obviously the independent voters aren't 80 to 90% of the population, but to win in an election, you've got to focus on those folks who are kind of in the middle. It's kind of the same way with process improvement or really change initiatives in any space, is that the middle majority are going to determine whether we succeed or fail. And organizational leaders who don't set high expectations or any expectations, which is kind of the norm in many organizations, for their employees, will perform at a level equal to an average employee. So if there's no expectation being set, which is the case in many organizations, especially when it comes to Lean Six Sigma and process improvement, if we just tell people, hey, if you want to do this, go ahead and do it, but if you don't want to, you don't have to, most people aren't going to do it. And honestly, they shouldn't do it, because if they're not being asked to do something or being measured on something or rewarded on something that is not part of their, for example, EPR in Kern County, I could see, and if I was in their shoes, I would say, why would I spend time and energy doing something I'm not going to get evaluated on? No expectation has been set for me. I've got only so many hours in the day. I'm going to focus on the stuff that I am being measured on. And by doing that, they're not going to do anything. And that's, I think, what we're really seeing right now with our intro workshop participation kind of falling off and having to do a lot of work to finding folks to fill our workshops and keep those quick wins coming. So a better scenario is setting the expectation to get the results. And what we really want to do is shift the average over to the right and have, like, this is what a super high performing organization looks like. It's got far more high performers than it does low performers, and very few kind of in the middle. And how do we do that? Well, we set the expectation. So two things I I would challenge everyone on this call with, if you've got direct reports, is to set the expectation that they will go to an intro workshop, and even better yet, they will implement a quick win this year. 2019 is just getting started. And if we start to set the expectation that, back to my previous comment about changing the culture, where everybody is constantly, or most people are on a constant basis, or most days is looking for ways to drive improvement, it's going to significantly shift Kern County government, in that we're going to have far more people looking at their work from a different perspective. But we have to set that expectation first. They aren't going to do it on their own. It just isn't going to work that way. They're going to meet their expectations, which are on their EPRs, for example. But if one of those expectations is not finding faster and better ways to do the work that they do, they're not likely to do anything. So if we truly want results, we have to tell employees what you want and give them the means to accomplish what you want, and then get out of their way and let them make it happen. So who should go to the workshop? Number one, we've already talked about this, rock star employees. These are the people that get a lot of attention, not because they dress like this crazy guy here, but they get a lot of attention because they get things done. They're the superstars in your departments. Those are the ideal people we want in the workshop. Another kind of person is somebody I call an influencer, in that this is something oftentimes when I'm working with the Lean Six Sigma teams and we're picking people to be part of the team. For example, working with a team with a bunch of Medi-Cal billers, where in this example, there was like about 10 people in this particular area. And we obviously couldn't have all 10 people on the team. They were working on a project to streamline Medi-Cal billing. We couldn't have all 10 on the team because that's just too big of a team. So we started to ask the questions around who are the go-to guys and gals in this process, that if this one person, this influencer, everybody looks up to, everybody goes to when they've got a tough situation or need advice, is on the team, and they are part of the solutions and implementation of the improvements, everybody's just naturally going to follow them. It's like getting all 10 people on the team by just having that one influencer on the team. So this is the person in your organization or people in your department that are kind of the folks, they're the go-to people. Like when you got an issue, you find that people are always going to them for solutions or for advice and for guidance, because they will have an influence on others when they have success with Lean Six Sigma, and they'll be able to share their success with others, and others will buy into it, and it'll create that culture change we're striving for. Another question, in fact, this is almost always one of the first questions I challenge leaders with, is when they're picking people to go to these workshops, is where do you see this person in 5 to 10 years? Are they a future leader? Because usually we don't want people in this workshop who are currently supervisors or managers or leaders, because they're going to probably struggle to get a project done, because leaders, managers, supervisors tend to be very busy people, and to stack a project on top of everything else they're doing is usually a bit of a stretch. So we're normally looking for people who currently aren't leaders, but if you look 5 years out, is this the kind of person who's going to be a possible leader in Kern County government? And if it is, they're a good candidate possibly for the workshop as well. Because again, like that illustration I had earlier, once they get promoted and they actually have that leadership position, their mindset, their belief of a new day, a better and faster way is going to trickle down to their people, and that cycle starts and that culture change starts to take place. And then the last thing is somebody who's demonstrated change. Maybe they're going to the workshop, they have gone to the workshop, even better yet, they've implemented a quick win, or even if they haven't done any of that, they've done something in the past to show that they're above average. They have done things to improve the work that they do, improve the services they provide to their customers or their clients. They've got some track record that says, they have the mindset of wanting to do better and improve in what they do. And they've done that in the past. And now we just want to give them some better, more effective tools when it deals with processes and improving processes to do it more effectively. So those are some characteristics as you start to pick people. And maybe if you've got people already selected, or maybe you're one of those people, you can use this as a reference. Because if you're on here and you're wanting to go to the workshop, you've already kind of probably checked off some of these things because you've got some passion or some interest for this. So preparing for the workshop, the one thing that I love about doing this work that's totally different than most other training is that you actually come to the workshop with something to work on. Like most training, you go to the workshop or you go to the training, and then after the workshop, you try to figure out how to apply it. And all the research says that, billions of dollars every year, for example, in America are spent on training, and almost all training leads to no results. And most of you can probably relate to this. I certainly can in my former days as an employee and going to lots of training, is that, kind of picture going to training, you spend a day or two or three at training, and in the meantime, things are stacking up on your desk, your inbox is filling up, and you come back from the training. And so the first thing you are thinking about is not how do I apply that training? You're thinking, how do I get unburied from all this work that's piled up while I've been gone? And before you know it, a week passes, a month passes, and you start to forget everything you've learned because you don't really have something to apply it to very quickly. So what's different about the Lean Six Sigma training for green belts is that they actually walk in with a problem. And that's really kind of the first step in this process of getting prepared, is finding a problem to work on, finding an issue, finding a challenge. And we'll talk about where to look for these things. But what a good problem looks like is something that's in an existing process. And an existing process is just simply something we're doing today. It may not be documented, it may not be formalized, but if people are doing it today, it's an existing process. And where Lean Six Sigma doesn't really work is like if you're trying to deploy something, you want to implement some new software or deploy some sort of project to do some sort of capital acquisition, those types of things. Like anytime you're designing, developing, implementing, creating, those are words that typically to me jump out and say, well, that's something that's brand new, doesn't exist. That's not a good fit for Lean Six Sigma. You can certainly use some of the tools in the Lean Six Sigma toolbox to do some of those things, but a good Lean Six Sigma process is looking at something we're currently doing already. And then the other thing is we don't have solutions or causes that are really evident. Like we may have some ideas, but we haven't really validated the causes, or maybe we've got some solution ideas that we need to consider some alternatives. If the solution is just do something, we could just go ahead and do it. That's really more of a quick win. But if we don't know the solutions, or the solutions aren't real evident, and likewise neither are the causes, that's a good check as well. And we've got obviously time and people available to work on the problem. We'll talk about what that looks like here in a second. And they want to work on it. Like there's some actual interest in the problem, because there's lots of problems. Nobody's got a shortage of problems, but there's some problems people just don't want to work on. There's not much passion for them. So that's another key thing. And there's actually some need or a business case. We'll talk about the finances here in a second. Not every problem has to have some financial benefit. It could just be the right thing to do. But we've got to have some organizational need to address with the problem. That's another good fit to check for. And then the last thing is, can it be measured? Like ideally, we want to be able to measure the before and after to see that we've gotten faster in the process, or that we've got fewer steps, or that we've do the process a higher percentage of the time correctly. So we want to be able to measure, because if we don't measure, it's hard to know, did it actually work? Did our improvements actually make this process faster and or better? So those are some things to be thinking about as you start lining up some ideas for projects to bring into the training. Now, how do we find those ideas? The very first one is probably my favorite, which is what's causing you serious pain. Because if you think about this, if you like go to the doctor and you've got some pain, for example, and she prescribes for you some a prescription, a medication, or maybe some therapy or both, and your pain goes away, you will believe that what she did actually helped you and what it actually worked. And it's kind of the same way with Lean Six Sigma. Many people are very skeptical, and I can understand that when we get started with Lean Six Sigma, because we haven't seen any real results, or maybe you haven't seen real results yourself personally. And a good starting point is like, what are the things that are causing you pain? And these might not be major costly issues. They might just be issues that are causing you pain because they're keeping you from getting to your real work. They're things you can't ignore. Like, for example, I was working with a client up in the Bay Area at a refinery that was trying to reduce the number of alarms I had going off for environmental issues that weren't really costing them much money, but every time one of those alarms went off, they had to stop what they were doing, fix the issue, and then come back to the work that they were doing previous to that. And it was just keeping them from getting at the real important work that they needed to do. They couldn't ignore it. And I like these as a starting point because they're kind of major thorns in your side that, if we can make them go away, you'll obviously have a benefit from fixing that problem, but you'll also become a firm believer that Lean Six Sigma works. You'll see it in action. Another thing is, what issue or issues are you most passionate about? Which ones really make your heart sing, that are the things that you think about at night when you go home or when you're at home on the weekends? Because if there's not much passion for a problem or an issue, it's going to usually take twice as long to fix, and there's a higher probability we won't succeed. Another thing is looking at what's on your EPR, or maybe even your boss's EPR. This is stuff you're already working on. What are you trying to increase or decrease, or minimize or maximize or streamline? Those are things you're already going to be working on, and possibly that could be kind of killing two birds with one stone. You do a project and you actually end up being able to check something on your EPR off. Another area is department goals. Like, what are you trying to accomplish from a broader perspective? This might be another way to look at any ideas you may have. How do these problems or these project ideas you have help you accomplish your department goals? That could be another place to look. And then the last couple here is your vision and mission. So looking at, like, why do we exist? What is it we're striving to do, and what's getting in the way of us accomplishing the mission or vision for our specific department? That could be another good place to validate some of your ideas against. And then the last one is budgets. None of this is really directly about money. Like, a lot of times people think Lean Six Sigma is all about saving money, and indirectly it is, because if we get faster at something or better at it, we are going to be able to do it for lower cost. But typically our goal or our problem is never reducing cost. Usually it's about increasing the speed of a process or doing it correctly more frequently, and it ultimately leads to cost savings. And if we are looking to figure out, like, where should we be focusing, like if we do truly want to have some indirect impact on our finances, where are we spending the most money? Because maybe that's where we have the biggest opportunity to save. So here's just a quick example of a project that's actually about to finish. This is one that many of you guys can probably relate to, which is Carmina Morales, who is on the call. Is working with the team at the library on this project to reduce the time it takes to take a book from the time any one of us drops it off at inside the library or the bin in front of the BO library to getting it back on the shelf. And so this team came together and says, okay, our problem is pretty simple. It just takes too long to put the book back on the shelf. And you would think, like, oh, that's a simple solution. Like, why don't we just take the books and get them on the shelf, faster? And it's like, well, it's not quite that easy. And so the team started to look at all the steps in the process and realized that, it doesn't take very long. It probably takes literally minutes to take a book from where it's dropped off to put it back on the shelf. But yet it took 12 days when they started to track this to actually get a book from somebody dropping it off to getting it back on the shelf. And why this was kind of an issue is, if you look at the library's mission, it's to build community and cultivate opportunities for Kern County residents by connecting people, ideas, information, and technology. And it's really hard to connect people with information and technology when it takes 12 days to do it. And you can imagine the books that are being checked out are obviously the most popular ones, and there's lots of people lined up to get those books when they get checked back in. So the team came together and started looking at all the steps in the process. Why was there so much waste in this process and waiting? Why was the book sitting around so long? Why was it going from this point to that point and being picked up again and moved over here and moved over there before it finally got on the shelf? And they found a bunch of different ways to streamline this process, and they measured again and got it down to 2 days. So now it obviously takes less time and more people can actually check the book out. So it's having an impact on not only getting it to residents quicker, but also fulfilling the mission of the library. And one thing to keep in mind is almost all projects are focused on one of two things. Either we're trying to do something faster or we're trying to do it better, like a higher percentage of the time we're trying to do it correctly. So as you start looking for project ideas, if you haven't zeroed in on anything else, you might just ask those two questions, like, what is it that we'd like to do faster around here? Or what is it we'd like to do correctly a higher percentage of the time? Right there, you've got a good starting point for identifying a project. Another question is, how much time is this going to take? This is almost always the number one question of leaders who are sending their direct reports or their followers to this training, because time is a precious commodity, and they want to know how much time this is going to consume. And it can consume, honestly, just like anything, as much time as you want. But again, this is where my approach is to keep it simple and to not overcomplicate it, because when we spend more time on a project, it doesn't almost ever lead to more results. We just want to focus on the stuff that's absolutely critical to success. And so I've broken this into really the two main people involved in the project. One is the facilitator, or the greenbelt, and on a monthly basis, they're going to spend on average maybe about 8 to 10 hours, or about 6% or so of their total working time if they're working 40 hours a week. So that's going to be split between a couple working sessions with their team. I generally prescribe meeting with your team 2 hours every other week. And I call these working sessions because in the session itself, if they're run effectively, most of the work can be done in the session. There's nothing really to do outside of the session for the team. For the facilitator, they obviously are going to have a little bit of time to prep for each of those sessions. And then there's also going to be some coaching that I will be providing after each of these sessions to kind of debrief on the session they just completed and then prepare for the next one. And then team members, on average, are going to spend about 4 hours a month in these working sessions. And for the most part, they're not going to have to do a whole lot outside of the working session. Maybe when we get to the point where we're implementing solutions, there'll be a little bit more activity outside of the actual working session. So they're only looking at about 4% of their total working time. And so you can kind of see how much time is involved in doing these projects. Not a whole lot. Now, what's the cost of the investment? And I call this an investment because if you look at the expense, like if you're buying something that you purchase, for example, like I'm looking at my Apple computer in front of me, and I paid like about $3,000 for my Apple computer. And that's not an investment because the value of it started at $3,000. It's probably worth about $1,000 now. And most things go down in value once we buy them. But investments, things we invest in, go up in value. They return more than they cost. And that's one of the awesome things about Lean Six Sigma is with most projects, I'd say 90% of the projects, we can actually do the math and say, we're going to spend this much money, we're going to invest this much money into somebody going to the training and getting the coaching, but then the return on that investment is going to be far greater than that initial investment. And what I'm going to share with you just assumes like somebody does one project and then they never use any of these tools again and they never do another project, which is almost never the case. I would say at least 50% of the time, most people, after they do one project, they get all their money back on the first project, but then they start to work on future projects, other quick wins. They use the tools as it makes sense going forward. So it's this, what I'm sharing with you here is just like they did one project and they stop, which is not normally the case. So the cost for the training or the investment is $57.50 for 10 days of training. We'll talk specifically about what those 10 days look like here in a second. And then there's also 13 one-on-one coaching sessions, give or take, for the facilitator to meet with me one-on-one for an hour a couple times a month to give them feedback and answer questions. And really, I'm there to connect the training to what they're actually working on. And if we look at the math on this, I call it return on training investment. Getting the most of the training really starts by picking a project that's going to get us a positive return on our investment. It's kind of like if you're looking to buy something, a stock or a mutual fund, for example, you can quickly do the ROTI on that, or the return on investment, and do the math like this. And I just use 50,000 because on average, that's about what most of my clients are saving, at least that. And so here you can see it's 870% return on that training investment. And I would say this applies probably at least 90% of the time. Most projects have some financial benefit, and we can do this math. But there's other folks. I'm working with a handful of folks right now on environmental type stuff, and they're just like, this is just a pain point. We got to get it fixed, and I'm not going to do an ROI like this on that type of issue. It's worth the money to fix it. It's just the right thing to do, is what my client told me. But most of the time, we can do some kind of back of the napkin math like this and say, well, gee, I wonder how much we would save. And okay, is it going to at least cover this expense, this investment? And if not, maybe we need to pick a better project. Or if it's just like my environmental client, a pain point, we're not worried about it. We just move forward and not worry about it. So what does it take to cover or save at least that much money. It's actually not that much. And here's just a quick assumption before we go forward and look at this calculation. And I just looked at like an average Kern County employee using transparent government. You guys most probably know about the site where you can see basically everybody's salary in the state of California. I think it's in other states too. And 60K a year is about what I saw as maybe the average, about 30 bucks an hour. And so then it comes down to how many hours do we need to save? And I'm assuming that the projects are going to be focusing on speed. And if we look at our last class, 90% of the projects were about reducing cycle time. Only 10% were really about quality, but the math would be very similar. So we do the math, and how much would it take us to save that money? Not a whole lot. So here's a simple example, 6 folks working in a process. This was a Medi-Cal billing process, and they had to save about 5% of their cycle time. So you picture 6 people working 40 hours a week, about 240 hours. A 5% reduction in their improvement in their process cycle time, which would be about 12 hours per week saved, is 624 hours a year. And to actually break even, all we need to make is about 4 hours a week, or about 45 minutes a day, which doesn't take very much time when you're dealing with a process with multiple people. So what I'm after here is just to help you see the math and how to actually look at your project ideas, and if the finances are a key point of concern for you, this is sometimes maybe a tiebreaker between different types of projects, like which one makes the most sense to go after. So again, you can see it doesn't take very much. Like we can spend $5,750 very quickly in just about any organization. And it doesn't take much. Like in fact, for example, for this example project, they actually ended up saving about 20%. But if they wanted to look at this project where these 6 people are working and figure out like what's the minimum they needed to save to get back that cost of training for the facilitator of this team, it would have only been about 2% of their process cycle time would have been reduced. And most projects have about 25 to, I would say 40% is kind of the typical cycle time reduction of most projects. So 5% isn't very much. Now, a couple more things here before I'll answer your questions is like, what does the actual training look like? The big thing that I've learned over the years of doing this training is that I found back a number of years ago when I used to do it from 8 o'clock in the morning till 5 at night, Monday through Friday, 2 weeks. And you can see the weeks are separated by about a month. So it's not 2 weeks in a row. It's 1 week in month 1, 1 week in month 2. What I found was people would go to the training 8 to 5, and usually about around 1:30, 2 in the afternoon, nobody was paying attention, and they didn't really get anything out of the afternoon because there was just so much information. So I said, well, why don't I start to trim out the things I'm not seeing people using in their projects? And I shrunk it down from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., which is what it is now. And what I found was after I did that, people said, hey, Scott, this is really helpful, shrinking the day, because now, and this is assuming people are working from 8 to 5, I can come in the morning, check in with my team, make sure that nothing's on fire. And then I know from 2 to 5 at the end of the day, I can come back and stay on top of my job for the most part. I know I'm not going to obviously get as much work done when I'm gone for most of the day, but I feel more confident walking away from my work. And even better yet, what I see is that when folks would go to this training 8 to 5 every day for a whole week, they would spend the next 2 weeks getting unburied. And before you know it, a month would pass and they wouldn't have done anything with their project. So this is the approach that I take now, where people actually walk in with a project in hand, and we start applying the learning right there in the workshop and start putting to use what they're learning with their project right from day one. And then in between the first week and the second week, which is going to be about a month later, that gives them time to do just one thing, which is have their kickoff session with their team, and maybe meet with their supervisor to talk about how it's going, and maybe have a session with myself as well. And then they come back for week 2, and we apply some more of the learning to their project, and then they're off to the races, and they're meeting with their team every other week, and I'm having coaching sessions with them in between those sessions with their team. So that's a little bit about what the training day looks like. And then the last thing is, what are the next steps? I mean, the next steps are getting your seat at the session. And if you want, this isn't really a requirement, but one of the things that I find is very helpful is when you start to think about, I've got all these different problems, which one should I bring to the training, or which one should I be handing out to the employees I'm going to be sending, is to have me come and chat with you about those issues. And don't even think about it from a Lean Six Sigma perspective, because one of the things that people can get into trouble with is like thinking, I've got to find a Lean Six Sigma project. Forget about that. Don't even think about Lean Six Sigma. Just get all your problems out on the table, pull your EPR out, wherever you're going to be looking for your problems, and start to zero in on the ones that you really care about, the ones that are pain points, the ones that are the biggest issues. And then I can help you determine, is this one really a good Lean Six Sigma project? Because again, it's not about creating more work. It's about looking at like, what are the issues and challenges you're currently facing, and which of those is going to be the best opportunity for Lean Six Sigma to help you solve that problem, that on top of that, you've got some passion for, that you see some benefit in. So those are kind of the next steps. And I'll open it up to questions, and you guys can unmute yourself. I don't see any questions in the chat box, but if you want to unmute yourself, or if you need me to, I can do that as well. So what questions or concerns do you guys have? No questions, concerns? Pretty straightforward, or? What do you think, Jason? What questions do you got? You got anything?
Okay, sorry. Thought I was unmuted, but I wasn't. I think briefly, if you don't mind covering a couple of other, you mentioned Carmina's project. Maybe if you just want to briefly cover a couple of other Greenbelt projects that are nearing completion with the 10 that we just did, maybe a couple others that you think are relevant for this next crop of Greenbelts. It might provide a little more perspective on some of the issues and problems that have been identified in different county departments. That might help if you're able to, Scott.
Yeah. Let me pull my list of projects up here. So the other projects we have going in behavioral health and recovery services, we have 3 projects there, and one of those projects is centered on purchasing. How do we streamline the purchasing process? So when somebody needs something, the time it takes them to actually submit a request to the time it actually goes to county purchasing is as short as possible. So we had a Greenbelt in behavioral health and recovery services work on that process, and developed, using some existing technology that we had available, a more automated process to actually have an automated workflow using some software we already actually had licensed. So they went from actually having a paper form to an electronic system that tracks it and sends email notifications and helps people to like see it, kind of like when you receive a package from Amazon, you could see it in real time as it's moving through the process. And a second project we have there that is also nearing the finish line is with audits being conducted with providers throughout the county for different mental health services, and trying to basically, this is a common issue with many processes, I'm sure, within the county and with many of my clients, where you've got multiple people doing it. Everybody's doing it a different way. So you can imagine if you're one of these providers that's providing these services, one day you're getting audited by me, the next day you're getting audited by someone else, and it's not very consistent. And so that team came together and came up with one best practice using all their collective wisdom, and was able to reduce the cycle time to do the audits. And now they can actually spend more time not doing auditing, but actually helping the providers improve the services and educating them and giving them greater guidance. And then a third project that we worked on there was one related to really more of a quality issue with patients not showing up. So a very high percentage of patients would not show up for appointments. This is a problem that many physicians, dentists, anybody that's in the medical world has is people don't show up. So you probably notice this now, like with your dentist. If it's like my dentist, man, I'm getting emails and texts and phone calls, and like they do everything to remind you to show up, because when they don't show up, there's a cost for that psychiatrist or that nurse that's helping them that we can't recoup because they've got nobody else to help, especially with some of these patients where their appointments are like 90 minutes long. It's not like you can fill in a 90-minute gap. So there's a project working on trying to reduce that no-show rate there. And then another one that touches on, I think, multiple departments is the board letter process, working on trying to streamline that process to make it more consistent for those folks that do a lot of board letters. And in HR, we've got a project going, trying to streamline the process, working with hiring managers to get them a list of certified candidates that they can pick from for hiring and getting them onto payroll sooner. And let's see, we've got another project in general services focusing on reducing the cycle time it takes to close out work orders. So many of you are probably familiar with work orders. If you ever have to submit a work order to fix like an AC unit or heating or any plumbing, those types of issues, working on streamlining that. So you can see most of the projects are really around, reducing cycle times, and every one of them is unique, but yet they're almost all the same, in that we're just trying to do what we do faster for the client. And usually speed is almost always, I would say it's usually like this last class, 90% are speed focused, 10% quality focused, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case for our next cohort, but hopefully that gives you guys some ideas on some of the stuff that we've got going. What else? Any other questions or concerns? You'll also notice in the appendix to the file that you received is kind of a more in the detail, in the weeds of what takes place in the workshop. So I'm not going to dig into all the specifics there, but you can kind of see there's an approach to what we're learning. And what we're trying to do in the workshop is to kind of like lay out the blanks to fill in for the facilitators as they work their projects. So one of the things that I try to do in these workshops is to, even though, for example, they don't know exactly what their process looks like, help them set up kind of a template that looks at what's the first step and the last step, naming the process. So kind of laying out kind of a roadmap from start to finish for their project. So as they go meet with their team, they can just start filling in the blanks, knowing what questions to ask. And as far as expenses outside of the cost of the training itself, we ask that people come with a laptop, because we're going to be doing some stuff with software, and there's a couple software programs that we want to have loaded on their laptop. But for the most part, there's not really a ton to do to prepare for the workshop. The biggest thing is finding the right opportunity to work on, so that when you walk into the workshop, you've got something in hand that is a good fit for the Lean Six Sigma process, and we can get started working on it right away. Okay, well, it's 2:57. If there's no other questions, you guys have got my contact info, I believe. And if you've got questions, you can give me a call or reach out to Jason or Carmina, who I think sent you guys the slides. And look forward to seeing maybe some of you, or definitely some of your direct reports in the workshop in April. And like I said, maybe a good starting point, once you've started to identify some problems, is to maybe reach out to me and we can have a call, or I can meet with you face to face and start looking at some of the challenges you're facing and figure out, which ones do you have the most passion for, and making sure they're a good fit for Lean Six Sigma. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to take a problem that's not a good fit for Lean Six Sigma and force people to use the process. Because ultimately what we're really striving for is creating this I want to do this again attitude. So one of the tests I like to give to teams when they get to the finish line is asking them, hey, do you want to do that again? Was that something you actually would do again, that you actually saw some value in? And when people want to do it again, they see the value in it, then I know we've really picked a good project and people are really engaged. And when they don't want to do it again is usually when we've taken some simple kind of problem that on day one or very early in the process, they know what needs to be done. And then we drag them through this Lean Six Sigma process of looking for causes and solutions and then worst case scenario, we actually end up implementing some solution, 3 months down the road that they knew about, on day one. And they're like, why did we just go through this whole process to do what we said we should do on day one? So we don't want to do that because nobody wants to do that again. So that's one of the things that I can maybe help with is when you start to come up with some of these different ideas is look at which of these might be a good fit or which one's the best fit. And then when we start to figure out which one's fit, then I usually say, well, which one of these do you have the most passion for? That might be a good starting point. Which one of these is the biggest pain point that you'd love to get rid of? Let's start with that. Okay, so like I said, I'm recording this and I will, is there a question?
I was just going to say thank you, Scott, and just tell everyone, I know questions sometimes hit people later, and whatever question they may have, feel free to reach out to Carmina or myself. Carmina sent everyone a reminder today, so you should have her contact information. I send out the original appointment, so feel free to reach out to me related to any question you might have related to cost, timing, dates, obviously the more technical questions related to your problem and identifying a project, et cetera, should be directed to Scott. But any of the more administrative aspects of going through this, don't hesitate to contact myself or Carmina. We're happy to help make this happen for you if there's a true interest. So thank you.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Jason. I will. I'll send Carmina a link to the video, and she can send it from there. And yeah. And then if you guys got questions, give me a call or email, and hope to see some of you or some of your direct reports in the workshop in April. So thanks.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you guys later.